we've got a topic from Ken Smith that is very near and dear to my heart on elementary education for our youth, basically. I used to be an elementary school teacher for many years. Didn't know squat. I'll tell you a quick story. I remember this little girl, Maggie, my last year I was teaching fourth grade. She's the first student to bring in a cell phone and have an Instagram account. This was 2015. And my only thought was, well, damn, it's starting early. Not one time did I think about the risks associated. Not one time did I think like, oh my gosh, all the cyber and the attackers. I had no knowledge of that. Now I have a 10-year-old son, and I'm borderline terrified, borderline just grateful I work in this field, surrounded by this. But I am here as a father in this session for sure, more so than anything else. Ken, take it away, buddy. Yeah, appreciate it.
First of all, appreciate everybody being here. This is a talk I've been noodling on for about 10 years and really excited to get the opportunity to put it all together. Excited to be in Charleston, if only for literally a few hours. And thank you to Simply Cyber for the opportunity to get down here. So I am Ken Smith, and we're here to talk about raising kids privately in a public world. First, a little bit about myself. I am currently the Director of Learning and Development at Praetorian. We're an offensive security firm specialized in high-end application testing, red teaming, and the like, purple teaming, just about anything under the sun you could think of. Prior to going to Praetorian, I spent 15 years in just general offensive security, ethical hacking. I led the team nationally at RSM US, big accounting firm, also do a lot of consulting work. I was in the red team at Bank of America for a few years. Got my start in signals intelligence after college. Spent a number of years with the Special Forces Group, and obviously there's a lot of carryover between the two fields there. I was formerly in academia, which is where the learning and development part comes from. I just recently stepped away after 10 years from the University of Mount Union, where I ran and developed the coursework for their network security minor. Huge passion for bringing people into the industry, for education, for training. A lot of that comes from. What is most relevant to this particular talk, though, is I'm a father of two elementary aged kids. And as I mentioned, been noodling on this for a long time. When my first child was born, I was out of the Army. I had been working for a couple of years as a pen tester, and my wife and I made the decision that we were going to keep them offline. We weren't going to share photos. We weren't going to do anything out there, not completely and totally locked in a cave, but just more conscious, right? My wife works at a school, and again, I was a pen tester, living kind of the worst case scenarios for a lot of these things, and just thought now's the time. So the point of this talk is to really talk about kind of my journey and general recommendations, things that are working for me, future ideas, where as we raise our kids, where we would like to see them. And the first place we're going to start is social media. Right? So like many good millennials, my wife and I were both still on Facebook just prior to the birth of our first child. And there was a particular set, I won't even call it a scenario, there was a set of circumstances that struck me and ultimately led to us making the decision to keep our kids offline. So I was probably 6-7 years out of college, and of course connected to everybody we knew under the sun. There was a particular person who I hadn't spoken to in probably about 7 years, an acquaintance. I wouldn't even say a friend. We were friendly, just in two different circles of friends, right? But you connect with people, and that's what you do, right? So had not spoken in almost a decade, and she did not have any kids of her own, but was very close with her sister, and lived life on Facebook, right? Would share pictures of birthdays, births, and hospital incidents and all kinds of stuff. And it hit me one day that I could pick those kids, all three of them, out of a crowd. Right? I knew what their parents looked like. I knew where they went to school. I knew their medical history. Right? I didn't have a right to any of that information. Right? And it was scary to think about if I continued to be on Facebook, inevitably, people 2, 3, 4, 5 degrees separated from me were going to know that about my kids, and it like I said, it hit me, and that was kind of the defining moment that said, you know what, we're not going to do this. We're going to keep our kids a little more private, right? And I think that's something that a lot of folks my age, right, millennials and Gen X, we take for granted that we were adults when social media exploded, right? I mean, MySpace, I was in college. Facebook, you couldn't even join in 2004 unless you were at a college that was on their approved list, right? And we had the ability to consent to put ourselves online, right? We had agency. But I think things have become so normalized around social media that we forget that, when my kids 10 years from now are in their 20s, if we had put them online, they would never have had that chance to make that decision for themselves, right? You can't take it away, right? You can pull pictures off of Facebook, you can pull pictures off of Instagram, whatever, but it never really goes away, right? You don't have control of it once it's out there. And so that's what was really important to us, was giving them the chance to make that decision, right? And the other part about social media specifically is that we know it's bad for kids, right? The data is out there, right? A couple of quotes here, numbers from the Health and Human Services. There was a study put out. It was the Surgeon General put it out a couple of years ago. It says those who spend more than 3 hours a day on social media double their risk to have poor mental health. Right? And unfortunately, the average teenager is spending already 3.5 hours a day on social media, right? 95% of teens, 13 to 17, right, have social media, are active on social media. More concerning, 40% of kids 8 to 12 are active on social media. Right? Absolutely crazy, right? When they were asked, the group that participated in this study, when they were asked, what are 3 things that you can tell us about social media? The most common was, it makes us feel worse about ourselves. Right? The second most common thing is, it makes us feel worse about our friendships. And the third most common thing is, we can't get off of it. Right? Terrible, right? Absolute recipe for disaster, and something to consider, right? If you have children, or you may have children, or you have your children in your family, keep them away from social media for as long as you possibly can, right? If you're on the other side of it, right, we have sharenting, right, which is oversharing by parents on social media, right? By the age of 2, 92% of kids in the U.S. Will have an online presence due to parents sharing information about them online. This was taken from a UK study, but it covered the U.S. as well. 42.8% of parents posts are about their children, right? So almost half of posts that parents put out are about their kids. Not surprising, but concerning, right? There was an incident in Austria a couple years ago where a teen sued her parents because of embarrassing photos she posted to Facebook. Lighthearted, right? It's kind of funny to think about, but when you really think about it critically, that's super scary, right? Because of the normalization where parents are putting their kids out on Facebook, we think back. If we're looking through photo albums from when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, like there are super embarrassing photos that I don't care to share with anybody, right? But now it's all out there, right? So concerning, right? This is the cover of the Surgeon General's report that was put out. Really a good read, worth looking into. So dangers of kids on social media. I mean, this is nothing that's surprising. There's nothing earth-shattering here, right? But you're handing over photos to train the AI models, the facial recognition models, right? Deepfake technology terrifies me, right? With what you can do for just a handful of photos nowadays is ridiculous. Of course, there's identity theft, and I'll have a couple of examples. We touch on that very specifically in a couple of slides. Uncomfortably, child pornography, right? Obviously not even necessarily pornographic images, but just images, oh, it's cute in diapers or in the tub, like that stuff shows up, right? And if it's, removed by 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 degrees, we lose control over that, right? As somebody who came from Intel, pattern of life, right? And building, you can build someone's, entire life, figure out where they're going to be at any given point during the day. Just watching their Twitter account, watching their Facebook, looking at Instagram, and if you are looking to cause somebody harm, looking to bully somebody, all this information is relevant, right? And then as far as sharenting goes, like, we should be setting good examples for our kids, right? And I know I'm preaching to the choir, right? These, all of us are here because we care about information security, so I'm not telling you anything that you don't already know. I just have very strong feelings about all of this. Hopefully that's apparent as I continue to speak here. Right? But we want to set good examples. If we can normalize behavior where our kids we're practicing good information security in front of our kids, they will pick that up, right? Kids are smart, right? They learn this stuff. Right? So to kind of put a cap on all of this, right? If you have to share photos with people, right? Send them over text, send them over SMS, right? If you absolutely must share them on social media, make sure it's private, right? That way, at least you have a certain degree of control over things, right? I say this was very hard. When our first was born, immediately, family members would call and say, well, I want to see. Like, well, we'll send you pictures. Well, no, just post them online. Like, no, sorry, we're not doing that. The first 2 years were difficult, very difficult with family, because the expectation was that, well, we want to see them, we live far away, like, oh, it's just one photo, it's not a big deal. But thankfully, like, my wife held firm as well, and we have managed to keep them largely off of social media, which is great. A lot of SMS text messages and whatnot, sending photos that way, but thankfully, knock on wood, nothing out there in the public, right? Something else to consider too is don't forget about schools, right? And adjacent, subject matter, right? Most teachers nowadays have classroom TikToks, classroom Instagram, right? When we first got our kids into school, we were the only family at the time that didn't sign the photo waiver, and we know the principal, we know some of the teachers, and so it became a conversation of like, well, it's not that big of a deal, like, everybody's signing it, it's really a formality. And I said, that's fine, like, where's your document destruction policy? Everyone kind of chuckled, and they're like, and I'm serious, like, if the teacher leaves halfway through the school year, who controls that account, right? When my kid moves on to the next grade, what happens to the photos, right? There are 80 kids in the class, I don't know all the parents, I'm not comfortable with it, right? And again, we've stuck to our guns, which is great, and we know it's a losing battle, right? At some point, we're going to lose the fight. And again, the objective here is not to permanently keep our kids away from this stuff, but it's to introduce it at a point where they have some agency, some ability to make an informed decision, right? And to limit the stuff when they're particularly younger, right? And unfortunately, to revisit the conversation we had with the principal, like, all of this is normalized enough where the default is just, well, we just, we share. We want you to see your kid in the classroom. I'm like, I don't care. Like, we're sending them there to go to school. We don't need the photos. There was another time where we took them to a Santa breakfast. My first was very, very young. And it was a time when all those photos were of, kids falling asleep on Santa's lap, and Santa would fall asleep. And they were adorable pictures. We went, and there was a photographer for a newspaper, and we said, hey, we didn't sign a waiver. We don't want any pictures. Okay, no problem, no problem. Well, sure enough, photographer snuck a picture and ended up on the front page of their website the next morning. And it was a full day to get them to take it down and say, look, I did not sign anything. Like this, I did not consent to this. We need it down. And it was a hassle. And I could have just said, it's one picture, right? But it's about consistency, right? So then, we can continually reinforce, that type of behavior. Last bit here on social media. If your kids have to use social media for one reason or another, there are schools that require access to certain accounts and that kind of thing, right? Monitoring, right? Monitoring. Make sure that you're sitting with them, or you understand, you can see everything. That is important, right? Conversation here, explaining the risk to them as basically as we can, right? And that's tough for kids who are 7, 8, 9, 10 years old to say this is just how our family works, right? There are dangerous people out there. We're not ready to put that information out there. People don't have a right to know this stuff about you, right? It's a hard conversation, and it's a continuous conversation, but it's important, right? No unrestricted access to devices, and that's a theme we'll revisit for the rest of the presentation as well, which is really funny because I think back to when I was a kid, like our TV time was time boxed, right? And we're monitoring. My parents, thank goodness, were good about monitoring what I was watching, day in and day out. And I think back, and really, this is the same, right? It's just more omnipresent than the TV is, right? And really, to kind of close out the social media with something a little deeper, maybe darker, this is not just about privacy and mental health, right? There are safety considerations here as well. A couple years ago, I was part of leading an engagement. We were working with a bunch of high net worth individuals at a healthcare company. And the idea was that one of the executives wanted to scare the pants off of all the rest of the executives. He was very concerned about what they were oversharing online. And so we essentially built target packages, right? For anybody that's been in the military, it's like, here's your target, find your intel, come up with attack paths to get to them. And some of them were very straightforward. Oh, we found this, so we're going to phish you. Oh, we found this, so we can go and get into your work or whatever. There were a couple that were rough. One of the gentlemen had a son who was very present on social media. We found everything about this kid. When his football practices were happening, what kind of car he drove, his license plate, dark corners of the street where he was turning that only had one way to go, and we're in a rural area, so if somebody wanted to kidnap this high net worth individual's son, they could be there waiting for him because we knew when the football practice was and how he was getting home. So like this stuff can be more of a safety concern as well, right? You hear stories about people posting where they're going to vacation on Twitter and whatnot, and they come home to a broken in home, right? This is kind of the same thing, except we're talking about kids too. Right. So the second half here is more of a generalized approach to just security education, and there's 4 specific areas that I want to cover today in just a couple of slides. Right? Passwords, video content, devices, and gaming. So passwords, of course, are, for better or worse, one of the core pieces of security, whether it's in the home or in a business, right? And it is what we do in our family is just passwords are sacrosanct, right? From day one, right? We teach our kids, do not share passwords with anybody. Doesn't matter the service, doesn't matter how small the password is, doesn't matter if it's your friends asking. We're building good habits that will hopefully stick with them as they go. And I actually, just last week, got some really positive affirmation on this. It was very timely. My oldest had a friend over, and they were on YouTube, monitored, which is how I know this incident happened, because I was sitting in the room just doing my thing, listening to what they were watching. The iPad locked, and the friend said, hey, what's the password so that I can unlock it? And my oldest walked over and said, you know what, actually, I'll put it in, because I want to make sure that you don't know my password. It's like, yes, like, all right, that's a win, right? It's not going to happen every time, but the behavior is starting to build, right? So again, kids are smart. They will pick up on this and internalize it, right? To bring it back to school again, right? Don't forget about the school passwords, right? We have encountered situations where there's 3-character passwords or passwords that can't be changed by us, right? We have to explain to our kids, like, well, we can't do that, and it's a problem, right? There's nothing we can do about it, but you should be aware that this is not safe, right? And I think of situations where down the road, if there's bullying involved, like, it's easy enough to figure out if you're using last name, plus a number on a password. You could submit grades on behalf of another student or go in and screw around with stuff. And some of this is the result of red teaming for 15 years and thinking out worst case scenarios, right? So there's some amount of paranoia in here, but trying to explain to them, like, this is things you could encounter, right? And so this is why passwords matter, right? So what we try to do with our kids is silly sentences, songs, things that they're gonna remember that are, end up being 12, 13, 14 characters long, but they're things that they will remember. We always say, don't use the pet's name, don't use your favorite things, right? Think of a song when you're doing this, and that's gonna be your password, right? And there's spaces that you can put in song lyrics, and so you get your special characters, capitalize the first word, and then you've got a strong password, right? So again, kids are smart. They can figure this stuff out. When it comes to video content, unfortunately, this is another unavoidable subject, right? They are going to encounter YouTube, regardless of where they're at and what ages they are, right? Other platforms. For us, it's all about time boxing and more monitoring, right? We keep an eye on the content. The time boxing helps to mitigate some of the potentially addictive behaviors associated with the video content. We don't do any short form. They're not on TikTok. They don't do the YouTube Shorts. We limit that through the YouTube Kids app, which is pretty solid. The algorithm is still scary, right? We don't let them go from video to video following the algorithm. The tracking is also disabled, something you can do within the Google accounts as well. But we say this is a creator that we generally will approve. Again, never unsupervised, which is, again, a reoccurring theme. But this is generally how we handle the video content. When it comes to devices, we found that the parental controls are really the key, right? We are, for better or worse, a very Apple-oriented house. So we have iPads and iPhones at home. The screen time is really, really useful. This helps reinforce the time boxing. Kids get an hour of media time, right, at night, whether it's TV, iPad, whatever. But at 8 o'clock, it's off. Sorry, that's the end of the night. And there are complaints, but in general, they're good, right? After they got used to the idea, they said, okay, it's 8 o'clock, so we're done with it and on to the next thing, right? It's easy enough to disable if you need something. You can whitelist apps as well, which is great. So things like, we do let them onto FaceTime, more of an emergency situation if they find themselves in the house. We don't have a landline because apparently landlines aren't a thing anymore. So they have the ability to FaceTime family and us if they need it. But things like Netflix and Disney Plus and all that shut down in the time boxing, which is great. I've used Android and Fire's equivalent controls in the past. I've always found the Fire controls to be clunky. Android, it's been long enough since I used them that I can't speak to their efficacy or anything like that. But they all have it, right? All the platforms have the ability to do this. And it's a pain. It's a pain to set it up. It's a pain when they're working on something and 8 o'clock comes and it shuts it off, and then I do have to go and unlock it or whatever. But you tell yourself, long term, this is the right thing to do, right? It's a lot of work, but it's the right thing to do. I do want to note that I'm not terribly concerned about content filtering just yet. They're not quite to the age, and we're not letting them on the internet, Googling for everything under the sun. But I have I have a home firewall with some web filtering that I've played with around here and there, and there's products out there like Firewalla and others where you can do that. So when the time comes, that is something that, this talk version 2.0 in another couple of years will likely feature some of that type of stuff. Gaming's the last bit here. We use Steam. Both of my kids are into gaming, and Steam seems to do the trick for us. We have a kid account, a family account attached to the child Apple account, which is also a thing. I didn't mention that with devices, but the child Apple accounts are really, really easy to set up and use as well. What the library sharing, I wasn't even aware this was a thing until recently. It means I can pick content like games out of my library and share them directly with my kids through their libraries. And if they get a game added to their libraries, it shows up in mine. So I can monitor what they're playing and what they're doing and games that are there. Steam also has search filters and things you can implement, and I have turned off the store for both of them unless they there's something that they want. Then we go in together. In terms of online gaming, we basically nil, right? We do some known friends only gaming, but they're not quite old enough yet for that to really be on their radar, so it's another thing that's probably coming in the next couple of years. We did give Roblox a shot. I like the kind of pseudo programming applications and whatnot you can do with it. We put the parental controls in place, but I will say, like, first or second game my oldest got into, the inappropriate content immediately came through, and I was like, sorry, we're not gonna be able to do that, bud. And moved on to the next thing. And again, there were tears and there were discussions and and some arguments, but long term, it's the right call. Just not quite there for it yet, right? Just to say you're not quite old enough yet. I don't know if you'll be able to hear the sound for this. I'm going to turn it way up, and maybe I'll hold the mic in for the online folks. But this is an online game, and of course now I'm blanking. What game is this? With the little tiny characters running around. Among Us. Thank you. So Among Us online. This was a situation where there was a kid who gave out their address to a room. Now, thankfully, they did the right thing and were like, oh, no, like, you don't want to do that. That's not a good thing to do, and educate. But it's very clearly a young child, and this is the kind of thing that can happen with unmonitored gaming going on.
What's your mailing address? I want to send you something in the mail. Okay, do not tell anyone your address. Don't ever do that again.
Okay.
Did he do it? Did he actually do it? Yeah, he told me his address.
I'm a
It was
girl.
a test. Okay, well, don't tell people your address, okay?
Okay. But you said you wanted to mail me something.
I'm a press It was a lie. If anyone else asks you about your home address, what do you say?
No.
There you go. All right, let's go kill some people.
So again, it turned out for the best, right? But still, I got to think, as a parent, this 8, 9, maybe years old, maybe even a little younger. What are they doing online? What are they doing online gaming like that? Just food for thought, right? So to bring this all to a close, and I just have a single slide here, right? To reiterate, all of this is difficult, and we're not doing things perfect. And like I said, eventually there are going to be photos that get out there, right? This was the first year that we did a at the bus photo for the first day of school and whatnot. And the neighborhood knows we don't post online. It may have entered the webosphere at some point, but again, we're slowly introducing this. We don't want our kids to be ostracized permanently from anything like this, and we recognize that this is just how the world works for kids and teens and preteens nowadays. But we're trying to control it as much as possible, right? Learning the parental controls and the devices and the software and whatnot that they're using. Again, huge learning curve for a lot of this stuff. It's just some of it's just not built well, but it has been effective, to date, worth the time. Monitoring. They don't use YouTube unless we're within hearing distance, right? And if they sneak it, then they lose the devices, right? And it's a lot of fights and arguments, at least at first. It gets better once they internalize the behavior, right? But it never gets easier, right? To say, okay, could bring it over, I'll unlock it, let's do this. Interactions at school and looking out. Again, we're not quite to the age where bullying is really on the radar yet, but we're keeping an eye out and trying to think through, is it worth getting them online so that they're not bullied for not being on social media, just so that they can be on social media and be bullied anyway. So that's a decision that'll be made down the line, right? Long term, I'm confident that we're doing the right thing. and hopefully, hopefully in a couple of years we'll be able to give this talk again and speak to some more of the successes we've had. So thank you so much for your attention and time. We're thrilled to be here. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. Take care.